Hi everyone, my name is Christine Dacey. I am lucky enough to be the CEO of the Churchill Trust of Australia, and me and my team are based here in Canberra on beautiful Ngunnawal and Ngambri land, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of that land and acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here, and that you are also coming to us from traditional lands all around the country. Welcome to this information session. Through the course of the next hour, myself and Andrew McCulloch, who will be chatting to you as well, who's a real life fellow, will be trying to give you as much information as we can to assist you in your decision making and contemplation of applying for a Churchill Fellowship in the 2026 round. This session is very much designed around giving you as much information as we can, as kind of clearly as we can. Andrew's definitely going to have some different perspectives, having been through the whole thing from start to finish, and I will hopefully have all the technical answers that you might need. Please don't worry if you think about a question after the session is over. There is a lot of really good information on our website. If you go to churchilltrust.com.au, and there's a tab on the front page called, which is Becoming a Fellow. All of our Q&As are there for you. And the team are also going to pop that link into the Q&A box here for you today. If you have questions through the session, please put them in the Q&A box that you will have attached to this. And in addition to having Q&As online, we've got FAQs, we've got sample applications, there's animations there's a lot of information on our website that you can have a good look through. And if you have questions still, by all means, you can come and chat to us after the session. This session will be posted on our YouTube channel, and indeed there are a number of other sessions that are already up there. We have got closed captions for this information session, and like you see, typically there's just that kind of couple of seconds pause between when people are speaking and how that closed captioning comes out. We tend to focus the session around the most common questions that are likely to apply to the most number of potential applicants. If you have very specific circumstances, we can talk to you one-on-one, but we will really cover as best we can the biggest number of questions for the biggest number of potential applicants that we can. I'll do a couple of slides and probably talk for 10 minutes, and then Andrew's going to do some talking and talk you through his experience. And then hopefully you'll have questions and answers coming through to us, and it really just becomes a bit of a conversation. We've found in other sessions that this works pretty well. So I'm going to stop doing the intro and then get into the first slide, which is who are we and what are we about. Some of you will know this already, but for some of you who are new, a Churchill Fellowship is part of an incredible program designed as a living legacy to Sir Winston Churchill, who was of course one of the most famous leaders and global figures of the 20th century. Churchill very much believed in the power of individuals to create and make change, and the fellowships are very much designed to support that ethos. We like to think that we've done a good job over 60 years of honouring that legacy. And in case you were wondering where the money came from, it came from everyday Australians who donated back in 1965. And so we take our stewardship and responsibility for ensuring the ongoing good name and nature of the fellowship program really seriously. We think it's much more than a trip overseas, and we also think it's much more than a simple academic process. We think it's a unique and life-changing learning opportunity. And the word learning we use in the broadest possible sense. One of the things that is really core to the DNA of our Churchill Fellowships is that you do not have to come through an academic pathway. It is about what your story is, what your passion is, and how you want to make a contribution. I do want to be very clear with you because I do get asked this question quite a bit. It is about travel overseas. So if you're looking to do domestic travel, this might not be the fellowship for you. The opportunity is for a minimum of 4 weeks and a maximum of 8 weeks to go overseas, to interact with people and organisations, to observe new practices, to make new connections. There might be a research element to it, but to go offshore and to experience some new things. And so that international travel is really, really core to it. And of course, once you finish, like Andrew, you become part of the Churchill Fellowship alumni, which is an incredible group of people doing amazing things. You know, some of them are hiding in plain sight, some of them are really focused locally, some of them are doing national things, and some would absolutely be names that you would recognize publicly. So a Churchill Fellowship, I guess at its simplest, is an immersive experience overseas for a minimum of 4 to 8 weeks, but we like to think it is so much more than that. So what are the things you need to know about applying for a Churchill Fellowship? So in terms of eligibility, there really is only one eligibility requirement, which is up to that you are 18 or older and that you're an Australian citizen or permanent resident. So there's no upper age limit. And we really have sent people overseas from 19 years old, you know, up into their 60s and 70s. So that's the eligibility piece. People sometimes ask us what sort of support we can provide. We do have some provisions for people who are in very remote parts of Australia and those who might have special needs to support their travel, for example, people with disabilities. If you have any of those things, we will talk to you about that. But 99% of people will just fall into the standard fellowship program. Your project has to be an individual project. It's not a team process. The one exception to that is we have joint fellowships for Indigenous and First Nations projects where an Indigenous person may choose to work with another Indigenous person or a non-Indigenous person, and the two fellows are actually doing the one topic jointly. Again, this is, you know, probably 5% of the program for most of you, the vast majority of you. It will be an individual process. I'll just point out to you that some of the fellowships form, there's an opportunity for you to tag your project to sponsored fellowship. I can assure you that nothing you tag or don't tag will rule you in or out. And that's fine. What we're trying to say to you is these sponsored fellowships exist. But they will not be the difference between you getting through or not getting through. So please don't concern yourself about it. By all means, tag it if you want to, but don't worry yourself that you are going to be disadvantaged or advantaged in that sponsorship space. Some top tips for applying. We get about 1,000 applications each year, and we usually pick around about 100 fellows each year. So approximately 80% of people who apply will not get an interview, 20% will get an interview, and 10% will be selected. That's a rough rule of thumb. So you need to be extremely focused in your application in telling us why is your project important now, who is it going to help, and how is it going to help, and what makes you the right person to deliver on this idea. And we talk about the 3 kind of pillars of what make a great fellowship: the people, the person, the people, the project, and your ability to bring about change at the other end of it. So have that kind of in your mind. The last one that's on the screen there is having a clear and sensible travel plan. What we find is some people get very, very excited and create these itineraries that are just, you know, a bit like a Kentucky tour, and it's just insane, the amount of stuff that people try and cram into that 8 weeks. And getting that balance right about what is achievable and sensible and allows you enough time to think and process and, be able to do it in a really high quality way is something that's really important to you. I get asked a lot about how much detail around your planned itinerary do you need to include in your application. And I always say to people, the panel will be assessing you on what you've put in your application. So you need to have given it a really good go and be really clear about, I am going to Chile, Argentina, Bolivia, the US, and these are the places I'm going, and these are the organizations and people that I want to talk to, versus I've got every I dotted and every T crossed. We know that if you're applying in, April this year, if you're traveling in July next year or September next year, some things will shift at the margins. Okay. So I always, rough rule of thumb is it's got to be about 70% right. You've got to leave yourself some room for flexibility. But if you tell me that you're going through all those countries in South America, and then after the interview you say, oh, no, actually now I'm going to go and do, Spain, Croatia, Turkey, Greece. Well, the panel can't agree to that, right? You have to have a sensible and well-argued itinerary that makes sense and a rationale for it. And I'm sure Andrew's going to talk to you about how he constructed his itinerary as well. We get a lot of questions on the itinerary. We're going to do some Q&As later, but one of the really common questions, or a couple of the really common questions that I get asked is, how much is fellowship worth? So I will just tell you that in 2025, the average fellowship cost was $37,900. And our feedback from fellows is that is sufficient and in fact generous for their needs. That covers your airfares, your accommodation, your travel costs, and what we call an overseas living allowance, and which we calculate on a by-country basis. That living allowance is not a wage replacement, and we need to be really, really careful about that. Someone just asked for that number again. It was $37,900. This is not about total wage replacement. This is about covering your reasonable travel costs, and it's a pretty generous amount of money. Again, I will just say choosing your referees is really important. I'm going to let Andrew talk to a bit of that. And the last bit from me is have a think about, is this your year? I'll just pop up the dates there. So 9 a.m. on the 27th, we open and we close at 5 p.m. on the 30th. I'm pretty sure it is. Yep, 30th. Shortlisted applicants are interviewed in May and June. One of the things you should absolutely do is go to our website and have a look at the dates that are listed by state for interviews. In the large states, New South Wales and Victoria, there will be 2 interviews. So the first interview might be done online. The final interview in those 2 states, and for everyone else, your one and only interview, are mandatory in person. I want to be really clear with you about that. One of the things that is at the absolute core of our fellowship and why we invest so heavily in sending people offshore is human being to human being contact. This is about the panel being able to see you, talk to you, and make their assessment. We have found in the past, particularly, for example, through things like COVID, when people do things on screens, people cannot give it their best presentation, and the panel is much less able to assess who you are. Those dates are fixed. Our panels are very generous volunteers. They're experts in their field. They're all cross-disciplinary. And so if you can't make those dates for the interview, then this is not your year. The good news is we've been doing this for 60 years, and 2027 might be your year. The other piece of the fellowship journey before you travel that is mandatory and in person is our onboarding. We bring everyone who is successful and chosen to Canberra in October. And I think it's the 15th and 16th of October this year. And again, that is mandatory and in person. And for all the reasons that I set out, people say, but you can do so much by Zoom. And we completely understand the value of Zoom. We're Zooming today. You can do some things by Zoom, but when we are making the sizable financial investment that we are at the moment, that is our requirement. So we do say to people, have a think about what's going on in your life. Some people have got little kids, some people have got aged parents, some people have got pets, some people have got work commitments, some people are running their own businesses. We want you to have a set of circumstances that allow your fellowship to be the absolutely right time for you and to give yourself the best shot of success. We announce the successful fellows in September. And if you are chosen, you have from 1 November this year till the end of January in 2028 to do your travel. So a good 15-month period. So I'm going to stop talking there and hand you over to Andrew, because Andrew will have lots and lots of perspectives as a fellow who's lived this road with you. And I can see lots of questions are coming in already. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, Christine, thanks for that. And I might just jump into it. So, I'm Andrew, and I studied how to mobilize communities during disasters. And so, the Churchill Fellowship for me, a pretty big life-changing opportunity, and a real opportunity to immerse yourself overseas. So, I did the full 8 weeks, and you only get one Churchill Fellowship in your life. You can apply as many times as you want, but you only get to do it once. So, I definitely make the most of it when it's your year to do it. I think for me, I might just run through a few highlights from my trip, then I'll go through the application process for you. But for me, I travel all around the world. Some of the highlights that I remember were walking along the seawall in northern Japan, where the earthquake and tsunami had impacted in around Ishtamaki north of Sendai. I visited some of the homeless camps in Turkey and the Syria border, which were impacted by the earthquake in 2023. I spent the election party in 2023 at the Australian Embassy in Washington, D.C. I stayed the night with an Amish family in Pennsylvania. I met an academic at a castle in the UK, visited a volcano with search and rescue in Iceland, and stayed a night on a remote island in Gothenburg and walked around Santa Monica just before the LA fires. So for me, those types of things were really in-person activities that Christine mentioned, that human-to-human contact that you can't get on a Zoom call when you're immersed in that environment. So I work for the New South Wales government, and at the time I was working for the Premier's Department, writing the New South Wales Review of Emergency Volunteering. And for me, it was really interesting to see that and go, like we're doing all this work around surveys and talking to volunteers around how we can do things differently. But there's some things you only get from overseas. We look overseas and go, well, heaps happening in this space in disasters. We're seeing the community respond differently to disaster management. What we do differently in Australia. A few colleagues had done a Churchill Fellowship in the past. They highly recommended it. And I love travel as well. So I've done a lot of travel overseas. And so in those trips, I've learned a lot from places like Christchurch and the earthquake there when I've been over there before. So I thought this is an opportunity that we need to get stuck into and actually make it happen. When you're at your desk in the office and you're reading research online, you sort of get that perspective of what's happening, but it's a totally different perspective overseas. Meeting those people, building those connections and talking to your new networks overseas, that's what really has been a takeaway from me from my Churchill Fellowship, is actually having that network now to call upon, not just during the fellowship, but down the track when you need something or you want to ask a different question or a different perspective. It really is valuable having that person-to-person contact. So in terms of my challenge, what I saw and what my sort of work is around is spontaneous volunteers or community mobilization around, we're seeing more and more disasters. There aren't enough emergency services to deal with the floods, the storms, the fires, the earthquakes, tsunamis we're seeing around the world. And particularly in Australia, we've seen this a couple of times in big floods where the community has come out to help. Overseas, there's much larger disasters we have in Australia. We've seen big things like the Turkish earthquake, even 9/11 in New York City, where we saw spontaneous volunteers in the community mobilized to help. We've seen this everywhere. So places like Japan, places like Turkey, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, these places have all had big disasters or have policy in place that government's working with the community to make this happen. And so I wanted to go to these places, talk to different groups and community organizations, government, academics, and learn from them, and then bring that knowledge back to Australia. In terms of what I did around applying, so I didn't really have someone sort of encouraging me, but my employer was very supportive of this. And so I'd say to you up front around this as well, as you're going through the application process, talk to your employer. This is important if you can get leave or even support to go on your Churchill Fellowship. For others, as Christine mentioned, is this your year? You have to work out if you can fit this into your existing busy life. And if your employer is going to take 8 weeks off to do this, their support is going to be very helpful for doing that. I think in terms of the application process, I wanted to talk about, I guess, like how you can make yours really sharp and pitch your project. So a lot of people apply to this, as Christine mentioned, but your application needs to stand out. And so as you do your application, do an interview, there's the video and writing your application, but the answers are quite short. So there's a character limit. And so you need to keep your answers succinct throughout the process in the video, in the application, and in the interview. I know my interview was about 20 minutes long, and there was a panel of about 10 people, and those questions were hard and fast, and so they come out very quickly. And if you waffle on, you have 20 minutes max, and they might answer one or two questions, or you can give sharp, short answers that answer the question and answer more questions and prove to the panel that you know what you're talking about. And so on that note, it's really important to know your topic really well and be able to explain your challenge and why it's important. So for me, I was able to do that pretty easily because when I work in this space, it's been a bit of an obsession of mine for about 10, 15 years around the spontaneous volunteering challenge. And so you need to be able to explain your challenge and why you need to go overseas to do it. So what's the need to go overseas and research this? And also when you get back, what's your ability to influence and have an impact? So how can you bring this knowledge back and actually make use of it in Australia? Key to that is your elevator pitch. So I'd say that really up front, that if I know people have come to me in the past and say, I might apply for this, and have lofty ideas and waffle on about these sort of programs, I'd say really clearly, make sure you sharpen your application process and you can explain to a friend or a colleague what you're actually applying for, why it's important, why you need to go overseas, and what your impact is back in Australia. So that's my tip for you to help with your application process. And it's worth just practicing the elevator pitch over and over again until you know what you've got, you can get it right. And also talk to your colleagues as well around refining that and making sure it's sharp and simple. And also, if it's relevant, is this going to be a topic that is actually of use to people? And your colleagues, your boss, your big boss at work might say, well, actually, have you thought about this or changing it slightly? So try and refine it over and over again until the application process to submit it and get your video done. So that's certainly worth doing. Once you get back from your report, you've got, oh, your fellowship, you've got 12 weeks to write your report. And so with mine, I wrote the report. I also made a podcast. And so I took audio gear overseas, took video gear, and I recorded all that just to have the biggest impact when I got back. And I'll shortly be releasing a documentary. So I've made a documentary based upon that trip. And so I've spoke to different people overseas, recorded different little video grabs that I've used throughout my report as well. You can download the report if you'd like to have a read of that, but that's certainly part of the planning. If you can add that level of interactive sort of, I guess, approach into your report, you might find that that's more effective in terms of communicating your message later rather than just writing a report that might sit on a shelf. So definitely try and make the most out of your experience. And when you come back, have that impact as much as possible. In terms of your itinerary, now, as Kristen said, 70-30. So I'd say that as well, that it's really important to have as much as you can planned in advance. And I had mine planned out pretty well. I still made some changes to it and I sort of learnt more things from different people. So again, talk to your colleagues, talk to your people at work who might know more about this topic and have some thoughts around how to do it. Talk to past fellows around what they did. I've had about a year since I was successful to when I traveled. And most of that year was spent doing a lot of research and planning to make the most out of my trip. Parts of mine were like a Kentucky tour, parts are a bit more sort of relaxed. And I definitely think you need a balance. You can't rush through for 8 to 10 weeks straight and without falling over if you go too hard. So make the most of it, but don't push yourself too hard. Otherwise, you won't learn anything. You'll just be rushing from plane to bus to train to get around and won't see anything. In my referees, I had someone senior, so I had a deputy commissioner in our organisation as my referee, which was really helpful to get that seniority in the I guess the trust and understanding what I do. Then I had a personal reference as well who knew exactly what I'm doing, worked in the space as well, and was able to verify that what I was doing had value, both to the industry and I had the impact when I brought it back that there would be I'm able to make a difference based on my personal skills and ability to communicate and all that sort of thing. So choose your referees wisely. Try and find someone senior and someone who knows you really well and can advocate about you in terms of the application process and your ability to do all this. So I think as you go through the application process, the biggest challenge for me was really that approach to keep it short, keep it succinct, and really make it so it reads really well, so people can understand what you're talking about. I thought I'd just finish up with before we go to questions, a few tips in terms of how I did mine. I think there is no perfect Churchill Fellowship applicant. Make sure you think about what topic you want to do. All people from different backgrounds and industries are accepted. So certainly think about your topic and nail it really well and understand if this is your year. And my sort of personal sort of thoughts as well is challenge yourself to go somewhere a bit different. A lot of people go to the UK, the US, and Canada. I'd say go somewhere really different. I mean, for me, when I flew into the Turkish-Syria border, it was challenging. Got off the plane and there was like uneven footpaths, and I was literally looked like no one else there. And people thought, "What's this guy doing here?" The security at the airport said, "Why are you here? Are you off to fight in Syria?" I said, "No, no, I'm here to do a research project," and they let me through. But those sort of places really challenge you, and you immerse yourself in that experience. But there's places you can go to get a very sort of different experience. And I definitely recommend that. And also, there's talk about bringing friends and family on your trip. I'd say try and go solo or go with someone who really, or meet people overseas who are really in your industry. Because as I said, this is an immersive opportunity to get involved, and you go for coffee and dinner with people you meet during the day, and they say, "Oh, come over to my house for dinner," which happened a few times. Um, Come stay with me the night. You can do other different things that really immerse yourself in that culture. If you bring your whole family with you, you can't do that. So I think just have a think about how that's going to work for you, and if this is the right year for you to do this based on, I guess, getting the most out of it. Because I said you only get one chance at this, so do it the best you possibly can. I think too, really think about where you can get the most value out of this in terms of meetings. So for me, I try to get a place that were really interesting and different. I'd get that human contact and places where I could see myself, the impact of disasters, and saw volunteers who are doing this. There were some meetings I went to that were online. I thought, well, I could have done them online. I thought, yeah, for meeting an academic in a university, some of those things sometimes you go do that online and save the best sort of meetings where you're actually in person doing something with someone for the trip. So that worked out really well for me to do most of that. There's probably plenty of questions, so I might kind of finish up there. But I'll just say that a lot of people don't expect to be selected. I was very nervous, not sure if I was going to get through or not. But really back yourself and think about what you could do to make the most out of the application, do the best job you possibly can, and really think about what impact it'll have when you get back. Sometimes it can take a couple of years to get your application right. That's fine, but make sure you really think about your application and give it the best shot every year you do have a chance to do that. And certainly, if you get it, make sure you put plenty of time aside to plan your trip and make the most out of it. So, on that note, unless anything from you, Christine, you'd like to ask, we might go to questions.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you, Andrew. So I always say, from start to finish, from the day you show up at info session like this to the time you kind of get through, it's probably more of a 2 year commitment, right? Like it's a thing.
Yeah, I think I applied, would have been back in 2023. It took most of 2023 to go through the application process and get selected, down to Canberra for October for the induction. And then I was sort of planning and didn't leave till September in 2024. So a lot of that time was then sorting out with work and organizing different connections and different networks overseas to meet with.
Yep.
And then the travel is a big part of it. So actually planning every step of the way of how you get different places
Yep.
and trying to work in flexibility. So there's opportunities. And I was over in the US for Hurricane Helene. And I didn't have time to go to Florida to see that, but certainly met with people on the way. And I did make some changes to my trip around that towards the end. But it's certainly, if you can add some flexibility in there, ideal. But yeah, don't underestimate how
Yeah.
much work it is for the application process and then the work beyond that to plan your trip.
That's right. I always say to people, it's 2 years. You're not doing this full time every day of that 2 years, but there'll be real peaks and troughs where it will be quite all consuming and other times when it's not. And just circling back to what Andrew was saying about he went solo, some people take their families. A couple of things to be really clear on. If you take other people with you, it's at your own cost. And of course, not everyone can afford that. Um, what Andrew said is really our very firm and consistent experience from fellows. If you have friends and family with you, all of that incidental, ad hoc, in the moment, spontaneous, add on. additional bonus contact and immersion is really much more limited for yourself. The trust is agnostic uh, in terms of you taking people, but we're very protective of our fellowships and we want you to get the most out of it. They are designed in a certain way. And so we do encourage people to think very hard. If you really want your family to join you, what we recommend is maybe they come and join you at the end. You know, lots of people do that. They kind of do the hard bit of the fellowship and then their family come and join them. I will also say, I'm fascinated that we let you near the Syrian border, and that's terrific. We are pretty careful. We work with within the the DFAT Smart Traveller advice. So think about your itinerary, about where it's safe, and everyone's personal attitude towards their own risk and safety is really manifest in all of this. So we unless you're on a do not travel zone, we'll let you go. But we do ask for people to exercise an extraordinary amount of common sense as we send 100 people all over the world every year. Just in terms of referees, Andrew touched on them a bit, and so 2 referees, 1 personal, 1 professional. We ask people and require people to have those done 2 days before the applications close. And the reason we do that is we've had a lot of feedback over the years that actually getting your referees right is one of the most stressful pieces of the application process. So we try and put that a hard deck on that so that in the last 48 hours, I mean, I'm sure everyone here will have done their written application beautifully before then. However, if you are still writing your application in the last 48 hours, that you have dealt with that part of it. So the referees piece comes in 2 days beforehand, and really choose people who know you. We had an applicant in a previous round who had an ex-prime minister who just clearly didn't really know them. And you want to put the most compelling case forward that you can. And in terms of compelling cases, another tip I will give you is don't just give me a list of 3 conventions that you want to go to and call them great networking opportunities, because we get 1,000 applications a year, and you can understand that the person who's got who they're going to meet, what they're going to do, why they need to be there. These are some of the linkages I can make versus, oh, there's a really great conference in San Diego and 4,000 experts from around the world will be there. It's just about putting your best foot forward, right? Conferences can be part of your itinerary, but the best applications don't center themselves on there, because everyone can network, and you are networking in a much more individualized and nuanced way. And so your itinerary and how you construct that is like really important in terms of selling yourself to the panel in what's a really competitive field. What else was I going to say? Writing up as you go along. We really encourage people. The report that Andrew talked about, some people really get angsty about the report. We don't want people to self-select out at the thought of having to write a report. At its basis, we want to know where you went, who you talked to, what findings you made, how you're planning on using them. We really encourage people to take good contemporaneous notes. Happy for you to use, Otter or any other transcription process that you want to use. At the end of the day, I myself was overseas for work last year, and at the end of the day, I just chuck it all into Copilot and get an 80% product for what I'd done that day, so that when you come back you can mash it all together. I don't know, I assume you were pretty disciplined about that, Andrew.
Yeah, I used Otter for everything, which was awesome. Every meeting I had, I recorded it. I used Otter to transcribe it and put the key findings. I guess the word of caution I'd use with that was when I was writing my report, I'd go, oh, I need to find who spoke about let's say spontaneous volunteers in Iceland. I dig back through all my notes and use AI to help find that. And sometimes I would make things up, and I thought, oh, I didn't remember having that conversation. And sometimes it would just sort of hallucinate and find things that were incorrect. So definitely, I took notes on the train afterwards or on the hotel that night to go, what are the key sort of things? Because AI doesn't get it right all the time. But certainly being able to transcribe them using AI was a huge time saver. So I could sit there in the meeting, actually focus on what they were saying, and then review that later and pull out the key thoughts without having to take every note and then not to know what they're saying during the meeting.
Yeah. So, I just can't stress it enough, because what happens is you're away for your 4 to 8 weeks and your life's still going on back here, and you come back and you're tired and your whole life goes, well, here's all the stuff that's been going on, and you need to get back to your life administration. And then you've got to write your report as well. And the report could be a podcast, it could be a book, it could be, you know what I mean? Like there are length limits. We don't need them to be long. In fact, we don't want them to be long. We want them to be impactful and targeted at the people that you are trying to influence. So really think through how much preparation you can do. And I always say to people, once your itinerary is approved, you can start writing your report then and there. You know where you're going, you know who you're going to be talking to, give yourself a head start, right?
And none of that
Um,
for mine. I started before I left Australia. I started writing, yeah, the introduction. I knew the end bit of the different who I'm going to meet and the sort of different chapters. Started putting those together, and there's more the recommendations and those sorts of things. Once you're overseas, you can start to then. And after I had probably like half my meetings, I started to come up with probably most of the report in my head, and then just added to that as I went to the sort of second half of the trip. So the similar sort of themes started to come out, and I was more adding value after that. So I think you can definitely start writing your report or even notes and a rough skeleton of your report while you're overseas. Because when you go back, you're tired, you're exhausted, back to the mundaneness of your day job, and you're like, oh, I wish I was back overseas again, having a great life. But the reality is, you've got to finish your report and get that done. So definitely make it easy for yourself and do most of that earlier if you can.
yeah. The other tip, Andrew, is about, you talked about testing your pitch and with others. We've got Churchill Fellows associations around the country. These fellows are really involved in the alumni space. If you go to our website, there's a link to each of their home pages. If you want to talk to a fellow, um, then they're a pretty good source. The other thing you could do is go to our webpage and find some of the reports. If you're working in the area of, say, disaster management, you can search by kind of subject topic, and then you can just click on it and reach out to a fellow. And if they've got time, we find that they're kind of pretty great at trying to give you some advice. So people, find that quite a useful exercise. And if you have applied before and been unsuccessful, we are not in a position to give individualized feedback to unsuccessful candidates. We're actually a very small charity. We've got a very lean operating environment and small FTE footprint. But we have generalized advice to unsuccessfuls. And I think that's actually a pretty useful document to read as well. Andrew, there's a question there for you.
Okay, so got a couple of questions in the chat. Sounds like a lot of people. How do you make all the right contacts? So for me, it was a lot of people I knew already back in Australia helped me with this, but there's a big process in trying to find the right people. This took a long time of everything from LinkedIn, reading academic papers, and then trying to find the author. So I'd look them up and say, hey, I'm coming to London. Would you mind meeting up? And then they'd often have other people. So once I kind of found my core group of people, they suggested others. And a lot of the advice I had before I left was make sure there's plenty of time in your itinerary, like keep a spare day in each place, because once you're there, they'll have other people to meet with. And that was a really good advice because when I was there, I'd find someone else like, oh, you should come to this event tonight or tomorrow, or talk to this person here. They can meet you here. And that was very valuable because those sort of spontaneous type arrangements are often some of the best where you don't realize you can't find the people online, but once you're there, you have those connections. And I was very fortunate that some of the people I met with went out of their way to really craft their itinerary or my itinerary around their life. And they gave me sort of 3 or 4 days with them or with other people to help. So, for example, in Istanbul, I met a guy there who was super helpful, Masut, and he helped me plan out my entire stay in Turkey, where to stay, who to meet with, my trip down to the Syria border, who to meet with there. And so that worked out really well. I used some of my budget to help pay for drivers and tour guides and translators in some locations, which was certainly helpful because I don't speak Turkish and a lot of those people didn't speak English, so I had to have that translator there to help with that. So just plan early, use LinkedIn, and then try and find connections through online and your other existing connections as well.
And Andrew, just to your point there, make sure if you're planning on using in-country translators and things like that, that you include that. We do all of our costings based on what's in your application, and that's what the panel assesses. So if you think you're going to need it, put it in there because you can't come back afterwards. Like when we go to the board to sign off on all this, we've budgeted for all of that. So it's really important to be as comprehensive as you can be.
Another question here around how did you plan and successfully implement your visits given the sensitivity of post-disaster recovery and language barriers? Yeah, great question. I think some of the places I went were recent. So Turkey was obviously a recent one. Japan was quite some time ago, but the language barrier there is quite challenging. So yeah, translators certainly help with that. And I was certainly not there as some sort of disaster tourist in many cases. I was trying to be avoiding that sort of situation, but really trying to learn from what happened. And so I think it's around being sensitive that you're not taking photos of broken buildings and people in distress, but it's really around trying to meet with people and really be an observer and a listener to that conversation. And so having those connections and the local connections certainly helped. That when I was introduced to people there, it wasn't like I was turning up off the plane with my camera out, ready to take pictures of people. I was there to listen and be introduced to people, have those meetings. But it's different in every country. So in New Zealand, going to Christchurch is very easy. Traveling to Turkey and Japan is much harder. So I think it really depends on where you're going. But I think it's just planning in advance, using common sense, and you're there to listen, not take photographs of people. I think is probably the key thing to take away from that.
Hey, Andrew, one of the questions is about how have you promulgated your work and how has the department used it? We find in the public sector in particular um, a real range in different departments and agencies' willingness for fellows to be publicly visible. Now, we have some fellows in the national security space, and that's a whole different thing. But generally speaking, when you are announced as a fellow, there's quite a bit of publicity. We like you to do media for us. If there's interest, we like you to be out there and about. We don't want for you or for us for you to be selected and then for you to come to say to me, my boss won't let me do any media. I've worked in the public service. I kind of understand the media rules, but I do think it is really worth a conversation in your work environment about what you will and won't be able to do and being very clear on that up front.
And I think I've been in a very supportive couple of workplaces that support me to do media. I love doing media, so it's really helpful. And had a bit recently with ABC and Channel 7 and others sort of talking about my fellowship and how that links to the work that I do. But other government departments certainly aren't as sort of flexible about that. But I think also, yeah, be comfortable speaking publicly, be comfortable talking about your findings with the media. And yeah, certainly if you need help with that, I think do a little bit of practice and training because people are certainly interested in what you've got to produce. But again, talk to your employer early, talk to you if you work for the government, talk to them sooner rather than later. I think about your application and what that might mean for the future.
And I'm going to field the one on consent because that's changed since Andrew did his fellowship. We have developed an informed consent framework, and we will talk potential fellows and fellows through that. In essence, yes, get consent. We've got some documentation. It's particularly an issue in First Nations engagements, but we just think it's kind of good practice to make sure that you have got informed consent from the people you're going to talk to.
There's a question there around how my travel and research has been part of, or how it's had an impact on the work when I've returned in the New South Wales government, and whether the department's been interested in using and implementing my findings. So I currently work for the SES, and it's been really good that the SES is super keen, and is a big part of our agenda now is looking at informal volunteering, and the research that I've done has certainly contributed to that. So I returned at the end of 2024, and in 2025, we were hit by Tropical Cyclone Alfred in the Northern Rivers, and then a major flood in the mid-north coast. And so in that event, in Taree and surrounding areas, we had significant impacts of floods with record flooding in those communities. And the community turned up to help. They wanted to volunteer, and we enabled that as the SES and across other government agencies as well. So that research I put into action in that flood event. I was super keen to do that. So working with the community group, bringing those people in, the research certainly helped frame our approach and our response to that. And it's now looking at what that means for the future. And so the research is certainly helping frame our future volunteering plans and our strategy moving forward as an organisation. So I'm assuming that's not the same everywhere, but it certainly has been a great experience for me in terms of having a supportive workplace that wants to adopt those findings and that research.
Yeah. I think that that point about how you are going to be able to use it is really important. And, when we talk about benefit for the Australian community, it's up to you to define what your community is. It might be your local netball club. It might be the disaster, people who are influenced by disasters. It might be the whole of the country. So much of it depends on what the project is, but you have to be able to explain it to, and there's no discount applied for smaller groups versus larger groups. The whole beauty of the Churchill Fellowship is that we do everything from pirate ship restoration to neurosurgery to disaster management to microplastics to hat making. That's kind of the loveliness of a fellowship program like this. And quite often people would not be really eligible for funding anywhere else except through a Churchill Fellowship. And I don't know, Andrew, I assume you met some pretty interesting fellows in your year.
Yeah, and that's probably the best part of it is that night when you're all down in Canberra having a chat with everyone and realize that there's so many interesting topics out there. Like there was a lot in my year that were looking at healthcare and other different topics, and just fascinating to go, all these smart people who come together and want to share their knowledge and have a chat about things. And I think that's probably a real benefit of the program is a meeting a whole group of different people that you wouldn't normally come across in life, but are really interesting characters.
So I'm noticing that the trickle of questions has slowed down. This is usually where I say to people, I'm going to give you a 5-minute warning because the last thing I want to do is just keep talking at you for the sake of talking at you. If you have any questions, this is the time to really have a go. I don't know if the one thing that we've also been clear about is when you're doing your written application, it's a character limit, not a word limit. So every full stop, space, semicolon, exclamation mark counts. And again, that goes to the discipline of being really tight on your word limit. I've been told that it is one of the truly great challenges of getting your application in on time.
It certainly is, but I think it's also a good thing that it really makes you think about what words are important and what are not. So making sure that you actually nail your application, be really clear on what your topic is, what the purpose of it is, why to go overseas, and what the impact is when you're coming home. So I think that was, at least for me, I had these big lofty ideas of long written applications and a fancy video, but really is not necessary. It's about like how do you be concise in your answer and make it really clear for people. So I think that's certainly think about the panel who are going through and assessing over 1,000 applications, and you need to make sure yours stands out and they're not wasting time on words that don't matter. It's very clear on what you're after. It is really important.
Yeah, can't stress that enough. There's a lot of reading that goes on after the round closes. So
And I think might be worth even thinking at this point too around what impact will you have when you get back. And it's a long way yet. You've got to get the application process in and do this, but think about how you use your findings. Will you write a report or do a podcast or something else, and how you can make the most of that. And I guess finding the people that you want to talk to overseas and have that experience, whether it's going to that conference or staying the night with someone who's like I know one of the really good experiences I had was actually we went to this remote island off the coast of Gothenburg, and so stayed on this island with a whole bunch of volunteers. And so sitting there having dinner with them, and the next day on their boats out on the ocean. It was really an immersive experience. It got you that like one-on-one time with these people to learn about what they were up to and what they do. And that for me was more than just having a meeting in a coffee shop. It was really useful to get that one-on-one perspective and that personal experience of what they do. So I found that was really useful. Questions come in. Thank you for your insights. What was the most challenging aspect of undertaking the fellowship? I think it's like definitely it's hard because it's when you're on a holiday, like a big sort of trip overseas or a holiday, you kind of forget all the bad parts and the hard parts, and then you come back and just remember the best parts of it. So I think there were some challenges, and I think it's probably the travel and the being tired because you are traveling between time zones. I got food poisoning in one location, and that was annoying. And then you're just exhausted if you don't plan your trip very well. So. Probably the biggest challenge before you go on the trip though is planning it. So I did 8 weeks, and then I had a couple of weeks in the middle of that for travel, but I actually made it basically a 10-week fellowship by extending that just to do my own sort of research. But it can get exhausting, and planning that level of detail around what days will be here, who you're going to meet with, and then organizing the people to meet with to be available at those times. That's probably the biggest challenge. And then people will go, "Oh, I'm not available now," or there's been some sort of weather event, and people pull out, that's certainly challenging, but that's sort of mitigated by planning in advance. And so doing as much work as you can, planning your trip, booking your flights, keeping things like accommodation as flexible as possible so you can cancel within 24 hours and then move locations if you have to. Try and take public transport to avoid renting cars and make it harder for yourself. I just try and pack light. Oh, that's probably the thing. I took a lot of gear overseas. I had about 90 kilograms of luggage leaving Sydney Airport because I had two massive suitcases, another bag full of camera gear. I'd recommend traveling with as little gear as you possibly can and traveling as light as possible. So I'm never making that mistake again to travel with too many suitcases because it's a punish to get around little hotels and up staircases. Just take as little gear as possible.
And just Andrew said that he kind of did 2 weeks in the middle on his own. He must have had a nicer CEO because I wouldn't have allowed him to do that. So just to be really, really clear. Uh, so, and then we've got a couple of questions in here about how early should you book accommodation. My view is if you can book it and pay it as soon as you can because prices do change. If you can afford it, the overseas living allowance gets paid to you about 2 or 3 weeks before you travel. You won't have to fork out for your airfare. We work with a travel provider who will work and pay for all the flights for you. We do all that bulk booking. So, yeah. Yes, it's worth applying for a fellowship if the researches that you've been doing is similar. Like if there are other fellow topics that are similar, but you've got to be able to explain why yours is different. That's kind of the simple um, rule of thumb.
I've got a question here around, do I have to supplement with much of my own funds? No, not really. I mean, I paid for two of my best mates to come over and help me in various locations. I paid for them out of my own money, but everything else is generally covered. Obviously, if you go and do this crazy trip and stay in fancy hotels, then that's up to you. But generally, the funds provided by Churchill Trust is more than sufficient for staying in reasonable accommodation. If you want sort of fancier places and you want to catch first class trains, you got to pay extra for that. But yeah, if you can easily get around without having to pay extra for all those different things, and there's more than enough to do that. I've forked out a bit of money of my own to buy camera gear to take with me, but generally I could have done that cheaper as well. Looking back, these are all lessons I guess you learn in retrospect. That a couple of nights I stayed in fancy places. New York City was very expensive, so some of those cities. New York is the worst. London's not far behind it, and Reykjavik and Iceland was pretty expensive as well. So just book those in advance if you can, with refundable bookings. If you can cancel it later and move somewhere else if it's cheaper. And also another feature that I found in ChatGPT recently is I've got a book trip coming up, and I've put in there to automatically check every week about hotel costs if they've gone down. So you can do things with AI now. I'm sure by the time you get to booking your trip, there'll be even better ways of doing this where you can get refundable bookings, regularly check or use AI to check it, and then try and find a cheaper rate elsewhere. But definitely, it's you can do it with the means provided to you for sure.
The one of the teams just answered the question, but I'll just say it for the group. We don't expect this to be like a 7 day a week, work yourself to death, forced labor march. You need to have periods of respite. So, I suggest you treat it kind of like a working week, 5 days of, fellowship and the idea that if you're in New York, you're not going to go for a walk through Central Park seems pretty mean to me. So, like, the whole point is that you're allowed to have some fun, but it's donor money. It's a once in a lifetime experience. So take it seriously and treat it like a job. That's kind of the advice I give to people.
And I didn't plan too much in the cities I went to outside of the Churchill plans because so I just wanted to be available that like rather having a fancy dinner reservation booked somewhere, it's like, oh, I might have dinner with the person I met with today and see what they want to do or get drinks afterwards or just have those sort of spontaneous opportunities that definitely happen everywhere I went. People, oh, come to this or come to that. And if you got plans to go to Disneyland or go out sightseeing, you kind of miss that real chance to do that. And you can always go back on a holiday and see the different places elsewhere, but I think make the most of the fellowship while you're there and do as much as you can. But then, yeah, have a day off here and there on weekends and those sorts of things. So,
Book yourself into an Airbnb so you got access to a laundry. Like there's a whole bunch of really practical things.
absolutely, yeah, that's really good. Yeah, trying to avoid big chain hotels, is what I did. So, trying to go, where can I stay that's local? It's in the best location. That's going to be a bit more authentic than just staying at the Novotel. That certainly worked well for me as well.
Yeah. Okay, we have 6 minutes left. This is literally the 5 minute warning. I see that we've answered over 50 questions, well over 50 questions though, so I feel like we've had a pretty good go at it.
And on the travel, I think there's you'll definitely find that there's unexpected costs. So I definitely keep some of that allowance just in case things bubble up all the time. Like it's in the UK, trains are very expensive, and across Europe, sometimes they're cheaper in other countries. And so the living allowance changes based on where you're going. So if you're going to America, you might get more compared to other different places. And so I certainly made the most of that because you'll need it. Going to America at the moment is very expensive everywhere you go, whereas Japan is becoming cheaper by the minute with the currency exchange. So I'm not sure if I add anything to that, Christine, around the
I
allowance.
guess I just, it's so funny. Some of the questions I get, there are so many things that I can control, and yet so many things that I can't control. People say to me, "What if I get to America and U.S. Customs and Border Protection say no, we don't like what you're doing," and they say, "Can we ring you?" And I'm like, "Well, I mean, you can, but I'm pretty sure that the U.S. Customs and Border people don't care who I am." These are sovereign nations, and so think in terms of your itinerary. Is my topic something that might raise curiosity? And I'm not just talking about America, I'm talking in all sorts of parts of the world, right? You've got to exercise a really high degree of common sense. Some people feel more and less comfortable going to the States now, either for financial reasons or geopolitical reasons. So our fellows are very smart, switched on, savvy people, and you have to be exercising that judgment all the way through. Everyone gets through it. We kind of really back ourselves and our selection process in to pick really good, capable people who are really very able to make smart choices, but think about it all because the world is unsettled and shifting. In some ways, that makes your fellowship experience even more interesting. But if your personal risk appetite is not there for it, don't put it down thinking, oh, I'll wave some fellowship letter around and that'll get me over the line. So, because as interesting and as important as we think we are, these are sovereign countries who will make their own decisions about who they let to enter. And, you'll have to get your visas, you'll have to do all of that kind of stuff, all the usual stuff that you do when you're traveling.
That sense of street sense is really important as well, I think, to understand like it's just being able to travel. And if you've traveled before overseas and you've been to sort of interesting places, you'll know how that is. But if you haven't, then I guess consider that as well around you're working over there, you're sort of traveling around, and often you're traveling in different areas that wouldn't normally go as a tourist. So in Japan, I went to places that the tourists don't normally go, same in Turkey. And it's a bit different there because you'll stand out and you need to work out how you'll manage that. Others might go to different places like hospitals and if you're doing a health one, or you might go to office towers in big cities, and so you have a very different experience to me. But I just think about, I guess, yeah, what's your plan for that, and who you're going to talk to when you come across some of those tricky situations.
Yes, the fellowship has insurance. We have a global insurance policy with Berkshire Hathaway. What we don't want is for people to say that they are using this to get their PhD. We're very protective of our fellowships, so it's not a hard rule out, but you would need to have to convince us that this is standalone, separate, interesting, and worthy of a fellowship. No, the fellowship does not, you cannot work while you're overseas. We're very clear on that. And you will not be given a work visa, and you shouldn't be applying for a work visa. Generally speaking, you apply for a tourist visa.
And there's no time to get work done. I was so busy with the fellowship and trying to get full concentration onto really meeting people, having good chats, that there was, yeah, no time for doing any, even work remote. It was just like, nah, my email's out of office until I'm back in 10 weeks. So wait weeks.
Yeah, and we really have a very firm policy on we expect people, when we're investing nearly $40,000 in you, to not be doing your day jobs. Now, I live in the real world. Of course, you'll get the occasional email and might have to do a call, but with the amount that we are spending on people, our expectation is that you are devoting one. No, the fellowship is not considered work. It is considered a fellowship, and you might be taking work leave, but it is absolutely the fellowship, and it is a really expensive investment that we make in you. Not your employer's not making this investment in you. So we have to be very clear on that and very firm on it. I feel like I've ended on a real downer, and I really don't want to. We actually really want you to think about applying. We really want you to experience the kind of fascinating process that Andrew's been through and hopefully change your life.
It certainly has changed mine. I think the opportunity I'm getting now, I'm almost just as busy as I was planning for the trip because people are constantly reaching out, going, "Oh, can you speak at this event?" or "Tell me about this," or "What do you think of this?" So you certainly elevate yourself as an expert in the space and make the most of that. Really lean into your fellowship opportunity if you get it, and put the best in for your application to make sure the best chance of having a crack in this year.
Um, there is a standard bit of advice we give on how you treat the fellowship money, and it will be in the Q&As on the website. So I am going to say that's 1 o'clock on the dot. I hope we've been useful and helpful to you. Andrew, thanks heaps. It's been really great hearing from you.
No worries at all. Thanks for having me.
Good luck, everyone online, and I really hope you apply. Thanks, everyone.